Hello everyone and welcome to an extra enthusiastic episode of Tiger Shoes Reviews. This is it, the game that the last two videos were building up to. The game that single-handedly got me into not only the Tekken series as a whole, but also fighting games in general. I remember visiting a friend's house one day in the late 90s and their older brothers were playing Tekken 3 on their big screen TV. It was love at first sight. But playing a few rounds of this game at a friend's house wasn't enough. I had to own it and be better at the game because at this point in my life, I was trash at video games. I convinced my mother to buy Tekken 3, and as I mentioned in the last review, she got both it and Tekken 2. I love you, Mom. You're the true hero of this review series. Since then, I played the hell out of this game in my youth before the PlayStation 2 took over the remainder of my childhood, and I always had a hard time putting this game down on occasional revisits, but that's mostly me wearing rose-tinted glasses. So without further ado, let's dive into the most successful fighting game on the PlayStation, Tekken 3. Tekken 2 was the most profitable fighting game for 2 years since its original arcade release, and Namco saw it fit to develop a third entry using the then-new Namco System 12 hardware. The faster processor allowed the developers to animate their 3D models more fluidly and make the game run more smoothly. This really shows if you've seen the final product compared to Tekken 1 and Tekken 2. Tekken 3 was released in arcades on March 20th, 1997, and saw a PlayStation release the following year. Since its humble beginning in the arcade scene, Tekken 3 became the most universally acclaimed title in the series, with most gaming magazines giving it 9s and 10s across the board. The sales for this game weren't too shabby either, just a mere 1.3 million copies sold in Japan during the first several months of the PS Port's release, and 1.11 million copies sold in the United States in 1998 alone. Tekken 3 became the best-selling fighting game ever until Super Smash Bros. Brawl beat its record in 2008, which still blows my mind to this day. The later games in the series are objectively better in terms of polish and quality overall, but is Tekken 3 still worthwhile to play today? Lord knows I can't wait to get into it, so let's begin with the story. If you recall Heihachi's ending in Tekken 2, he defeated his son Kazuya and threw his unconscious body into the mouth of a volcano. However, before then, Jun Kazama, the nature-preserving officer and observer of the paranormal, had an intimate encounter with Kazuya and became pregnant with his child. 14 years after the end of the second King of Iron Fist tournament, Jun lived in seclusion with her son Jin, and the two lived peacefully up until what happened in the meanwhile. Heihachi has since reclaimed his position as the CEO of the Mishima Zaibatsu, and has not only undone the damage Kazuya caused, but ultimately established his world peace. But that peace is disrupted when his personal army, known as the Tekken Force, woke something up during a temple raid in Mexico. This was Ogre, the god of fighting that exists solely to challenge and defeat strong warriors and absorb their souls. And it does just that as he attacks various martial artists around the world, killing King and injuring Baekdu-san in the process. Jun senses Ogre approaching from afar and warns Jin to go to his grandfather if anything bad happens. And of course, anything bad happens since Jun is missing and their home is destroyed. Jin makes his way to the Zaibatsu as he was told and explains the situation to Heihachi. Not one to pass up the opportunity to track down Ogre and gain more power, Heihachi agrees to train the young man and give him his chance to avenge the death of his mother. 4 years later, Heihachi announces the King of Iron Fist Tournament 3 to use his own grandson and other capable competitors as bait to lure in Ogre and capture him. Only a few familiar faces show up this time around, but sport new designs and additional moves. Most of the fighters here are newcomers with completely new fighting styles and backgrounds, or inheritors of older characters. For example, the king in this game is a successor of the original that was murdered by Ogre. He was an orphan trained by Armor King to inherit the Jaguar mask and the spirit of the Luchador. Haorong, or is it Hwarang? I don't know, is a Korean street punk who learned the Olympic style of Taekwondo from Beck, who enters the tournament to not only get back at Ogre for supposedly killing his master, but also to settle his rivalry with Jin, who he fought to a draw prior to this game's events. Julia Chang is the adopted mother of Michelle Chang, who enters the tournament to rescue her mother, as she had learned that their tribe's god causes people to disappear, and Heihachi stealing their family pendant in the last game are connected. Seeing as how this pendant is what awakens Ogre in the first place, I can only imagine Heihachi and Kazuya knew about its existence beforehand. but I digress. The endings here are a big improvement over the other two games in terms of presentation. I could probably squint my eyes and fool myself into thinking that this was CG from Final Fantasy VIII or something. A lot of these endings are incredibly significant and carry over towards their personalities in future installments. One of my favorites is Eddie Gordo's ending. After beating up a bunch of mafia goons and questioning who was responsible for his father's murder, one of them points to some photographs of Kazuya Mishima, another casualty of the selfishness of the Mishimas. Another great one involves the new king fighting in a championship match to impress Armor King. He wins, but drops the belt when he disappears in a locker room, either mourning the original king, suffering from his heart condition, or is proud of the new king's success, but doesn't want to show it. No matter how you look at it, it's a chilling ending. Of course, most of these endings are incredibly goofy, Mokujin's fourth wall break being my favorite, and despite that, do a good job of painting the character's personality, much like the previous game. And just like before, I'll save the true ending for last, so let's dive into the gameplay, shall we? The PlayStation version of Tekken 3 features all the modes introduced in Tekken 2, including Team Attack mode, which I completely forgot to mention in the last video. You select a number of characters and duke it out until your opponent runs out of fighters. It's pretty much how King of Fighters handled its team-based structure, except you can have more than 3 characters on your team if you wanted. Tekken 3 also introduces several new modes that expand your gameplay time even further. First up is Tekken Force, a 3D beat-em-up where you take on a bunch of Heihachi soldiers until you beat the boss at the end. You only have a single health bar to work with, and if you get KO'd, the game's over. Tekken Force has a bit of a steep learning curve to it since you're taking on multiple enemies rather than fighting one-on-one, but the mode itself is pretty short with only 4 levels to clear. It's kind of fun actually, but it's also kinda hard. Tekken Ball mode is a volleyball minigame where you use fighting moves to hit the ball at the opponent or do damage by scoring regularly. This is a little fun distraction that spices up Tekken's tried and true fighting mechanics and gives it a quirky little spin. This will be the first of many goofy minigames this series will offer. There's also a theater mode that lets you view all the unlocked arcade endings and several of the various openings across both versions of the game. Tekken 3's core gameplay is very similar to its predecessors. You attack using all 4 face buttons for your punches and kicks, block incoming attacks, throw, counter, and yada yada yada. However, one new mechanic that was added changes the scope of how battles will play from here onwards. Everyone can sidestep to avoid attacks or perform counter moves to target the opponent's blind spot. This may seem like a simple new feature, but after playing through the first 2 games' arcade ladders multiple times, this sidestep is a godsend. Because in the new System 12, battles are much faster and smoother than before, and playing these characters feels so much better. There are 6 returning characters this time, including Paul Phoenix rocking a 5 o'clock shadow, Nina Williams looking better than ever, her sister Anna returns with a fresher fighting style, Yoshimitsu sporting his most iconic look in the series bar none, Lei Wulong rocks a ponytail but doesn't lose an ounce of his spryness, and Heihachi, despite having gray hair, is still as ruthless as ever. Everyone else in the cast are completely new characters that either inherit moves and styles from older fighters, or rock a completely new fighting style altogether. Eddie, who fights with capoeira, was one of the most impressively animated 3D characters in a video game, and still looks great today. Forest Law is the son of Martial Law, who fights similarly to his father but showcases a nimbler take, keeping the Bruce Lee homage strong and alive. Ling Xiaoyu uses her speed and acrobatics to try to fake out her opponents. She's pretty cool, I guess. Haorong switches between facing forward and backward to mix up his hard-hitting kicks. Definitely one of my favorite newcomers in terms of gameplay. King II is a much more versatile wrestler than King I, displaying more savage throw combos and moves inspired by wrestling superstars that look clean as hell. This version of King is so much cooler than the last one, and is still one of my all-time favorites. Brian Fury uses Muay Thai and kickboxing much like Bruce Irvin before him, and the dude hits like a truck. Julia Chang uses a similar form of Chinese Kempo like Michelle. Though I'm still not a huge fan of her playstyle, she's a neat character that kind of ties to the plot. Gunjack is the new Jack on the block with a more radically different design, though I do not see a single gun on him. False advertising. The Kuma in this game is the offspring of the one from Tekken 1 and 2, and has a palette swap in the form of Panda, Xiaoyu's pet and bodyguard. They both use bear fighting and have some of the funniest moves in the series, my favorite being the river dance routine. Mokujin is a living training dummy that acts as a mimic fighter. During each round, he copies the fighting style of a random character in the roster, theoretically making him the hardest to master. But it is pretty funny seeing a hunk of wood doing electric wind godfist jungle combos. Probably the strangest newcomer is Gon, a guest character from the manga of the same name. He's a tiny dinosaur with one of the most unorthodox fighting styles out there. Dr. Boskanovich, you know, this guy from Tekken 2, is another weird case where he has a hilarious gameplay gimmick, but I feel his unlock stipulation is a bit too steep. And finally, we have the new main character, Jin Kazama. I can say with confidence that Jin is not just my favorite fighter in the series, but also my favorite fighting game character of all time. Being the son of Kazuya and Jun, he inherits some of their best moves and uses a few of his own. The hard-hitting misstep punches and lethal counter throws make him a very well-rounded character, and it definitely helps that he's one of the coolest designs for a fighting game protagonist out there. Even when he changes his fighting style in Tekken 4 onwards, Jin has always been my go-to guy in Tekken or any game he appears in. Yes, even Street Fighter Cross Tekken, which we'll get to someday. Maybe. I don't know. With the battle engine fine-tuned and considering most of the cast is a blast to play with, Tekken 3 is probably the most balanced roster in the series. Even with characters I'm not that great with, I don't find myself getting angry when I get my ass kicked. I always feel like getting punished by whiffed attacks were my fault, and not just because the computer reading inputs like it can see through me. That makes it all the more satisfying when I eventually defeat them with a sick punish combo. Overall, Tekken 3 is a huge improvement over the last two games, and I can't recommend it enough. If you want a damn good 3D fighter on the PlayStation, this is it, my dude. I guess the only thing left to cover is the final boss and the canon ending. Stage 10 pits you against Ogre, whom after absorbing the souls of various fighters, uses their techniques as a sort of hodgepodge fighter. Unfortunately, he's the easiest final boss in the series. After kicking his green ass and telling him, "This is my swamp now," Ogre grabs the unconscious Heihachi and absorbs his strength. This leads to him transforming into True Ogre, a giant chimera monster that breathes fire. Again, he looks menacing, but it's nothing he can't handle. Jin kills the monster and effectively avenges his mother and the other lost fighters. But he doesn't even get a second to celebrate as he's ruthlessly gunned down by the Tekken Force and his own grandfather. However, not only did Jin survive, but he transforms into his own devil form and gives Grandpa his just desserts. Jin flies off into the moonlight, not to be seen again until Tekken 4. Speaking of which, that will not be the next Tekken game I cover, as the next one is a non-canon Dream Match title. The next time we tackle the series, it will be its grand debut on the PlayStation 2, the phenomenal Tekken Tag Tournament. But that won't be the next video, since I want to focus more on PS1 fighters before moving on to the PS2. You know, to build up the hype, I suppose. So look forward to the next review when that drops, and let me know in the comments what retro fighting games you want to see on the show. I'm literally open for anything. Also leave a like if you enjoy this review, it really does help in the long run. Until then, thank you all for watching, and have an awesome day.
I have to go now. My planet needs me.